You've eaten a burger today, or yesterday, or at least 100 times this year. You didn't think twice about it. Beef, ground beef, a patty on a bun. It feels like the most normal thing in the world. But here's a question that should stop you cold. Why beef? Why not buffalo? Because 60 million of them once roamed this continent. 60 million. That is more animals than there are people in the United Kingdom today. They covered the Great Plains like a living, breathing carpet of muscle and horn. You could stand on a hill in Kansas in 1800 and watch a herd pass for 3 days straight. 3 days. And you still wouldn't have seen the end of it. These were not small animals. A full-grown bull weighed over a ton. They were enormous. They were everywhere. They fed entire civilizations for thousands of years. And then something happened. Something so fast and so total that it almost doesn't seem real. Within about 30 years, nearly all of them were gone. And here we are today, eating beef from a cow that isn't even native to this continent. Most people assume the answer is simple. We hunted them out. But that's only half the story. And the half you don't know changes everything. Stay until the end of this video, because the last part doesn't just explain what happened to the buffalo, it explains something uncomfortable about the way human civilization actually works. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. Let's go back. Way back. Because to understand why you're not eating buffalo right now, you have to understand what buffalo actually were. Not just as animals, as a system. For thousands of years, the Great Plains of North America were one of the most productive ecosystems on Earth. And the buffalo were the engine. They grazed in massive rotating herds, moving constantly across the land. As they moved, they trimmed the grasses down, then left. That gave the grasses time to recover. Their hooves broke up the hard-packed soil, letting rainwater soak in instead of running off. Their dung fertilized the ground. The whole prairie evolved around them. The grasses, the soil, the birds, the insects, the wolves, the rivers. Everything was tuned to the rhythm of 60 million buffalo moving across the plains. Now imagine living inside that system. Imagine you are a plains tribe in 1600. You wake up and the ground literally shakes. Not from an earthquake, from them. A herd is passing nearby and the vibration travels through the earth itself. The sound is like distant thunder that never stops. For the peoples of the plains, the buffalo wasn't just food. It was everything. The hide became shelter and clothing. The bones became tools and sleds. The sinew became bowstrings. The stomach became a cooking vessel. The dung became fuel for fires on a treeless plain. Even the tongue was a delicacy. There was almost no part of the animal that wasn't used. These communities had adapted to the buffalo over thousands of years. Their whole calendar revolved around the herds. Their migrations, their ceremonies, their economy. And it worked. It worked for thousands of years without collapsing, without exhausting the herds, without destroying the land. So what changed? Guns changed it, horses changed it, but more than anything, the market changed it. Here is the part of the story that most people don't know. The mass slaughter of the American buffalo in the 19th century was not primarily about food. It was about leather. In the 1870s, tanneries in the eastern United States and in Europe figured out how to process buffalo hides into industrial leather. Strong, durable, cheap leather. And industrial machinery ran on leather belts. Factories, mills, equipment of all kinds. The Industrial Revolution was hungry for leather. And suddenly, the 60 million buffalo on the Great Plains were not just animals. They were a leather supply. Professional hide hunters flooded the plains. These were not people hunting for food. They set up in one spot with a long-range rifle. They could shoot dozens of animals in a single session without moving. A skilled hunter could kill 100 buffalo in a day. The hides were stripped, stacked, and shipped east. The carcasses were left on the ground to rot. Millions of carcasses. Just the bones left, bleaching in the sun across hundreds of miles of prairie. The scale of it is hard to comprehend. By some estimates, hunters were killing around 3 million buffalo per year at the peak of the slaughter. Per year. And this went on for decades. But here is the part that makes this story truly dark. It wasn't just the market, it was policy. Senior figures in the United States government understood exactly what the buffalo slaughter meant for the plains tribes. No buffalo meant no food. no shelter, no economy, no way of life. General Philip Sheridan, one of the most powerful military commanders of the era, reportedly said that the hide hunters had done more to end the conflict on the plains in a few years than the army had done in 30. He reportedly suggested they should be given medals, because killing the buffalo was killing the independence of the tribes who depended on them. The destruction of the herds was, in part, a deliberate weapon. Let that land on you for a second. 60 million animals, gone. Not entirely by accident, not entirely by market forces, by design. By 1889, fewer than 1,000 wild buffalo remained on the entire continent, from 60 million to fewer than 1,000, in less than one human lifetime. Now here's where your burger comes back into the picture. While all of this was happening, something else was being built. The cattle industry. Longhorn cattle had already been in Texas since the Spanish brought them centuries before. But after the Civil War, the demand for beef in the eastern cities exploded, and the same railroads that carried buffalo hides east started carrying cattle instead. The cattle drives began, cowboys pushing herds north from Texas to the railheads in Kansas, refrigerated rail cars shipping beef to Chicago, the Chicago stockyards processing millions of animals a year. The whole industrial food machine that would eventually become the modern beef industry was built in the same decades that the buffalo disappeared. It wasn't a coincidence. The buffalo were cleared, the land was opened, the cattle moved in, and the economic, political, and physical infrastructure that was built to process cattle became so enormous, so entrenched, so deeply wired into the economy that it's still running today. That's why you eat beef and not buffalo. Not because beef is better, not because anyone sat down and decided it was the superior choice. Because of a specific set of decisions made in a specific 30-year window in the 1860s to 1890s. Decisions made by hunters, tanneries, generals, railroads, and politicians. And those decisions locked in an entire food system that has shaped every meal you've eaten since you were born. But wait, there's more. Because here's the question that really pulls at you. If buffalo were so abundant, so productive, so deeply integrated into the land, why didn't the settlers just eat them? Some did. Buffalo meat fed railroad workers, settlers, and army posts for years. But buffalo presented serious practical problems for the emerging industrial food system. Here's the first one. Buffalo don't domesticate well. Cows are among the most domesticated animals on Earth. They've been selectively bred for thousands of years to stand still, to accept human control, to gain weight predictably on grain, to reproduce on a schedule. A buffalo is a different animal, a wild animal. Even today, ranchers who raise buffalo describe them as fundamentally untamable in the way cattle are tamed. They jump fences. They charge without warning. They don't herd the way cattle herd. They follow their own instincts and no one else's. You cannot run a buffalo through a system designed for cattle. They will break the system. And the system that was being built in the 1870s and 1880s was designed for cattle. The fences were built for cattle. The chutes were built for cattle. The slaughterhouses were built for cattle. Once you build that infrastructure, you don't rebuild it for a different animal. You just keep using it. Here's the second problem. Buffalo meat is actually really good. Leaner than beef, lower in fat, higher in certain nutrients. You'd think that would make it more desirable. But in the industrial food system, lean was a problem. The factory farming model that developed in the 20th century was built around marbling. Fat running through the muscle. Because fat means flavor, tenderness, and consumer satisfaction in a cheap industrial cut. Cattle can be grain-fed in feedlots in ways that produce that marbling predictably and at scale. Buffalo on grain don't marble the same way. Their metabolism is different. Their bodies are built for the lean nutrition of wild grasses. So in an industry racing to produce the cheapest, most consistent, most appealing product at scale, the buffalo lost. Not because the meat was worse, because it didn't fit the machine. And now here's the part that connects all of this to you. Right now. Today. Think about the things in your life that exist not because they're the best option, but because they're the option that was already there, the path that was already built, the system that was already running when you arrived. Most of us eat what we eat because of where we were born and what infrastructure existed around us. Most of us work in industries, live in cities, use technologies, and eat foods that were chosen for us by decisions made decades or centuries before we were born. The buffalo didn't fail because it was the wrong animal. It failed because it arrived at the wrong moment, at the exact moment when industrial systems were being locked into place. And once those locks clicked shut, alternatives became almost invisible. This is something economists and historians call path dependency. The idea that once a system is established, it tends to perpetuate itself. Not because it's the best system, but because the cost of switching is enormous. Everyone who builds on top of it has an interest in keeping it going. Every ranch, every slaughterhouse, every feedlot, every distribution network, every restaurant chain is built on the assumption that beef is what people eat. To switch would mean rebuilding all of it. And so we don't switch. We just keep going. Now, here is something that should make you lean forward. The buffalo is not gone. After coming within a whisker of total extinction, conservation efforts in the early 20th century pulled it back. Today there are around 350,000 to 400,000 buffalo in North America. Most of them are on private ranches. Many of those are raised for meat. You can buy buffalo burgers, you can get buffalo steaks. It's in stores. It's on menus. And yet, it is still a tiny fraction of beef production. Americans consume roughly 28 billion pounds of beef per year. Buffalo production is measured in the millions of pounds. Not billions, millions. The system is so large, so entrenched, so self-reinforcing, that even a healthier, leaner, ecologically better suited alternative can barely make a dent. Because the game isn't about which meat is better. The game is about who controls the infrastructure, who owns the slaughterhouses, who has relationships with the distributors, who has shelf space in the grocery store, who has the advertising budget to put their product in front of your face 3 times a day. Buffalo ranchers don't have those things. Beef producers do. And so you eat beef, not because you chose it, because the system chose for you. Now let's zoom out one more time, because there is a layer underneath all of this that goes even deeper. The buffalo were not just a food source that got replaced. They were a keystone species. When you remove a keystone from an arch, the arch collapses. When the buffalo were removed from the Great Plains, the entire ecosystem that had evolved around them began to change. The grasses changed. Without constant grazing pressure and the movement of herds, certain species of grass took over and crowded out others. The soil changed. Without the hooves breaking up the surface and the dung returning nutrients, the soil structure shifted. The rivers changed. The prairie wetlands changed. Species that depended on the buffalo maintained grasslands declined. The whole system that had run stably for thousands of years began to destabilize. And then came the plows. Settlers broke the prairie sod and planted wheat. And in the 1930s, the combination of drought and stripped-out topsoil produced the Dust Bowl, one of the worst ecological disasters in American history. The topsoil that the buffalo ecosystem had built over thousands of years blew away in a decade. Entire communities abandoned. Hundreds of thousands of people displaced. A landscape turned to dust. Now here is the gut punch. Some ecologists today argue that restoring large buffalo herds to the Great Plains could actually help reverse some of this damage. Buffalo grazing, done the way nature intended, with movement and rotation, can rebuild topsoil. It can restore native grasses. It can bring back grassland birds and other species that have been declining for a century. There are people right now working on exactly this. Tribes reclaiming their lands and restoring their herds. Conservation organizations buying up marginal farmland and rewilding it with buffalo. A small but growing movement that says the land remembers what it was. And it wants to go back. But here we are, still mostly eating beef. From an animal that isn't native to this continent, raised on land that used to sustain 60 million buffalo without any human management at all. So why don't we eat buffalo? Because 30 years of decisions in the 1860s to 1890s locked in a system so large and so powerful that a century and a half later, we're still living inside it. Because the most efficient animal for the land was also the most inconvenient animal for the machine. Because sometimes the wrong thing wins. Not because it's better, because it got there first, and built walls around itself. And because most of us never stopped to ask why the burger tastes like beef and not like the animal that built this continent. Next time you eat, think about the choices that were made before you were born, the systems that were built while your great-great-grandparents were children, the paths that were laid down and that you walk every single day without knowing they were ever chosen. You didn't choose beef. You inherited it. And somewhere out on the Great Plains right now, a small herd of buffalo is grazing in the way buffalo have grazed for 10,000 years. And the land underneath them is slowly, quietly, beginning to remember.